What is TestNG, and how does it differ from JUnit? TestNG is a testing framework for Java that is designed to cover a broader range of test categories such as unit, functional, end-to-end, integration, etc., while JUnit is primarily focused on unit testing. What are the main features of TestNG? Some of the main features of TestNG include annotations, test parameterization, grouping, dependency management, parallel execution, reporting, and data-driven testing. Explain the TestNG annotations you've used. Common TestNG annotations include @test, @before method, @after method, @before class, @after class, @before test, @after test, @before suite, and @after suite. These annotations allow you to control the execution flow of test methods and setup/teardown operations. How do you handle dependencies between test methods in TestNG? TestNG allows you to specify dependencies between test methods using the depends on methods attribute in the @test annotation. This ensures that a particular test method is executed only after the specified methods have passed successfully. What is parameterization in TestNG? Parameterization allows you to run the same test method with different sets of data. TestNG supports parameterization using the @parameters annotation, where you can specify parameters at the test or suite level. How do you perform data-driven testing in TestNG? Data-driven testing in TestNG involves running a test method multiple times with different sets of test data. This can be achieved using data providers, which supply the test method with the necessary data. Data providers are annotated with @data provider. Explain the concept of groups in TestNG. Groups in TestNG allow you to categorize test methods and selectively execute them based on their group membership. You can specify group inclusion and exclusion using XML configuration or programmatically. How do you enable parallel execution in TestNG? TestNG supports parallel execution of test methods and suites to speed up test execution. Parallel execution can be enabled at the test, suite, method, or class level using the parallel attribute in the testing.xml file or programmatically. How do you generate test reports in TestNG? TestNG provides built-in support for generating test reports in various formats such as HTML, XML, and JSON. You can use listeners and reporters to customize and enhance the test reports according to your requirements. What are the different types of listeners in TestNG? TestNG provides several built-in listeners such as iTestListener, iInvokedMethodListener, iReporter, iSuiteListener, and more. These listeners allow you to perform actions at different stages of the test lifecycle, such as test start, test failure, test success, etc. How do you handle test dependencies when running tests in parallel in TestNG? When running tests in parallel, you need to ensure that dependent tests are executed in the correct order. TestNG provides mechanisms like thread pools, priority attributes, and dependency groups to manage test dependencies in parallel execution. Explain the concept of soft assertions in TestNG. Soft assertions allow you to collect multiple assertions within a test method without failing the test immediately upon encountering the first assertion failure. TestNG's soft assert class is used to perform soft assertions, and you need to call assertAll at the end of the test to mark it as failed if any soft assertions have failed. What are the benefits of using TestNG over JUnit? TestNG offers several advantages over JUnit, including support for parameterized tests, flexible test grouping and prioritization, more extensive annotations for test control, built-in support for data-driven testing, and better reporting capabilities. How do you skip a test method in TestNG? You can skip a test method in TestNG by either throwing a skip exception within the test method or using the enabled attribute of the @test annotation and setting it to false. Explain how you would configure TestNG to run tests in different browsers using Selenium WebDriver. To run tests in different browsers using TestNG and Selenium WebDriver, You can leverage the @parameters annotation to specify browser types as parameters. Then, you can use a data provider to supply multiple sets of browser values to the test method, allowing it to execute across different browsers. What is the purpose of the @dataprovider annotation in TestNG? The @dataprovider annotation is used to supply test methods with datasets for parameterized testing. It specifies a method that returns a two-dimensional array of objects, where each row represents a set of test data and each column represents a parameter value. How can you implement retries for failed tests in TestNG? TestNG allows you to implement retries for failed tests using the retry analyzer attribute of the @test annotation. You can create a custom retry analyzer class that implements the iRetry analyzer interface and configure it to retry failed tests a certain number of times. Explain the concept of listeners in TestNG and provide examples of scenarios where you would use them. Listeners in TestNG allow you to customize and extend the test execution behavior by intercepting various events during the test lifecycle. Examples of listeners include iTestListener for general test events, iInvokedMethodListener for method invocation events, and iSuiteListener for suite-level events. You might use listeners to capture test results, perform setup/teardown operations, or integrate with external reporting systems. How do you manage test configuration and environment setup in TestNG? TestNG allows you to define test configuration and environment setup using configuration methods annotated with @beforeSuite, @beforeTest, @beforeClass, @beforeMethod, etc. You can use these methods to initialize test data, set up test fixtures, start services, and perform other setup tasks before executing the actual test methods. Explain the concept of method overriding and how it applies to TestNG listeners. Method overriding in TestNG listeners allows you to override default behavior and customize the handling of specific test events. For example, you can override the onTestFailure method in an iTestListener implementation to capture additional information about failed tests or perform custom error handling logic.